We are non-racialist in our approach. That is, we regard as an individual as an individual, and that everybody must be accorded his full political rights, whether he be white or black, educated or uneducated, rich or poor.
Robert Gabriel Mugabe, a name that resonates deeply across Africa and the world. To some, he was the courageous liberator who fought to free his people from the chains of colonialism. To others, he was a leader who overstayed his welcome, becoming a symbol of oppression and economic collapse. In this video, we reflect on the complex life of a man who defined Zimbabwe and whose legacy continues to spark debate. This is the story of Robert Mugabe, revolutionary, president, and the father of a nation. Born on February 21, 1924, in Katama, southern Rhodesia, Robert Mugabe grew up under the shadow of colonial rule. His early years were marked by both hardship and a rigorous Catholic upbringing. Mugabe's father abandoned the family when he was still a child, leaving his mother, Bona, to raise him and his siblings in the midst of poverty. Education became Mugabe's path to escape his circumstances. He attended the local Jesuit-run Katama College, a prestigious institution that fostered his academic excellence and deepened his sense of discipline. His mother instilled in him the belief that education was the weapon to fight oppression. In 1950, Mugabe won a scholarship to study at the University of Fort Hare in South Africa, the same university that shaped future African leaders like Nelson Mandela and Julius Nyerere. It was here that Mugabe's political consciousness took root. Exposed to the ideas of Pan-Africanism, Marxism, and liberation movements spreading across Africa, Mugabe returned home with a firm conviction. Zimbabwe had to be free, and he would be part of that struggle. Before Mugabe would become a revolutionary, he was a teacher, a role he held close to his heart. For several years, he taught in Ghana, where he also witnessed Kwame Nkrumah's efforts to lead Ghana into independence. The experiences in both education and politics shaped the man who would soon join Zimbabwe's liberation fight.
Tonight, 4 black schoolboys are spending their 19th night in prison without a charge.
In case Mr. Ethan Company may feel this bunch is just a horde of extremists, I'll give him a practical example. There is a certain degree of tolerance in a chained, tame animal. You may pester it for the first time, and you can do that for as many times as you like. But a time will come when that big chain will snap and the big animal will remove its tail from its hind legs. Then it will start, barking. Then from barking, it will bite.
In the 1960s, the winds of political change swept through southern Rhodesia. The white minority government, led by Ian Smith, clung to power, oppressing the black majority under racist policies that denied them basic rights. It was against this backdrop that Robert Mugabe co-founded the Zimbabwe African National Union, or ZANU, in 1963. ZANU, led by Mugabe and others like Ndabaningi Sithole, sought to dismantle the colonial system by any means necessary, including armed struggle. The path to freedom would not be peaceful. Mugabe became the face of the Kumurenga, the second liberation struggle, a war fought with determination, strategy, and sacrifices made by thousands of men and women.
This is the voice of Zimbabwe. The Patriotic Front is now broadcasting your program through Radio Mozambique. People of Zimbabwe, victory is certain.
Maputo once called Lorenzo Marques the capital of Mozambique, which now plays host to the largest, most secretive guerrilla army operating against Zimbabwe Rhodesia. Its leader is said to be a terrorist. He's so hated and feared that his fellow countrymen are forbidden to publish his name, Robert Mugabe.
A luta continua.
In 1964, Mugabe was arrested by the Rhodesian government and spent the next 11 years in prison. But even behind bars, his influence grew. His reputation as a leader and visionary of the liberation movement strengthened. And upon his release in 1974, he wasted no time in leading ZANU from exile in Mozambique. The guerrilla war raged on for nearly a decade, a conflict that claimed the lives of tens of thousands of Zimbabweans. But it was Mugabe's diplomatic prowess during the Lancaster House talks in 1979 that led to a ceasefire and paved the way for Zimbabwe's independence. In 1980, the people of Zimbabwe celebrated their freedom, with Robert Mugabe emerging as the first prime minister of a liberated nation. Robert Mugabe's first decade in power was hailed as a triumph for African independence. Zimbabwe's education and healthcare sectors flourished under his leadership. His government invested heavily in building schools, training teachers, and providing free primary education, which soon gave Zimbabwe one of the highest literacy rates in Africa. Mugabe's policies of reconciliation were also initially praised. Despite the bitter conflict that led to Zimbabwe's independence, Mugabe extended an olive branch to the white minority, ensuring that Zimbabwe's economy, particularly its agricultural sector, remained productive. For much of the 1980s, Mugabe was seen as a statesman and a voice of reason in the often tumultuous landscape of post-colonial Africa. His efforts to unite Zimbabwe earned him respect both at home and abroad. But by the late 1990s, Mugabe's leadership began to unravel. Facing increasing pressure from the population over land ownership, Mugabe initiated one of the most controversial policies of his rule, the Land Redistribution Program. The aim was to return land that had been seized during colonial rule to black Zimbabweans, but the execution of this policy was chaotic and devastating. The forced evictions of white farmers, while correcting a historical injustice, plunged Zimbabwe into economic ruin. Once the breadbasket of Africa, Zimbabwe's agricultural output plummeted, and its economy soon followed.
Do you consider,
Pure and simple.
and everybody believes that,
Yes, all people believe it.
so do you consider white Zimbabweans to be Zimbabweans?
Those who are naturalized and have citizenship, yes.
Those who've been living there for years and years and years?
But historically,
Right.
historically,
The people who've
they have
been-
a debt.
Contributing to farming, historically they have a debt to pay.
Yes, the land, they occupied the land illegally. They seized the land from our people.
Look.
And therefore, the process of reform, land reform, involved their having to hand over the land.
But
We agreed upon this with the British, by the way.
By the early 2000s, inflation had reached astronomical levels, and Zimbabwe's currency became virtually worthless. Hyperinflation devastated the Zimbabwean economy. Millions of Zimbabweans were thrust into poverty, and the international community imposed sanctions on the Mugabe regime. Mugabe's grip on power tightened as opposition to his rule grew. Allegations of human rights abuses, political violence, and election rigging further tainted his leadership. As the opposition gained strength in the 2000s, Mugabe's government became increasingly authoritarian. Elections were marred by violence and fraud, and Mugabe's longtime opponent, Morgan Tsvangirai, became a symbol of resistance. Yet, Mugabe clung to power. In November 2017, after 37 years in power, Mugabe's rule came to an abrupt end, not by democratic elections, but by a military coup. Facing immense pressure from the military and the people of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe resigned at the age of 93, marking the end of an era. Mugabe passed away in 2019, leaving behind a deeply polarized legacy. To some, he remains the hero of Zimbabwean independence, the man who gave his life for his people's freedom. To others, his rule is a cautionary tale of power's corrupting influence and the dangers of dictatorship. Robert Mugabe's legacy, like the man himself, is complex, filled with both triumphs and tragedies. The story of Robert Mugabe is not just the story of one man. It is the story of a country, a continent, and the struggle for self-determination. In his life, we see the promise and pitfalls of revolution, the power of leadership, and the heavy burden of legacy. As Zimbabwe continues its journey forward, Mugabe's shadow looms large. His name will forever be remembered, whether in admiration or in criticism, as one of the most influential leaders in modern African history.